So today we'll be taking a deep dive into conditional functions in Excel. So we have if function, count if, and sum if. For today's class, we'll just take a look at if function. So basically, what our if function is saying is if you have a given criteria or a given condition that you are meant to follow, how do we go about it in Excel? So we do that by using the if function. But if you have more than one condition or more than one conditional statement, we use what we call the ifs function. The ifs function. Given the scenario that we have here, we have different sales reps from different regions with different sales. So the company policy basically is if you make a sale above 1 million naira, we give you 15% as commission. If you make sales of 600,000 naira and above, we give you commission of 7%. Down to you making less than 350,000, we give you just 2% as commission. So coming here, what's our commission? So we start with ifs function. Start your function in Excel with equals to then ifs. So what is our first logical statement? Our first logical statement basically is our sales should be greater than the first condition, which is now 1 million, comma. So what's the value if true? The value if true is that we will give the sales rep 15%. Let's log that because we're going to be copying down our formula. 15% shift 8 of the sales that was made. Then comma. Moving on to the second logical statement. So we're saying as also check if the sale is greater than the next condition, which is 600,000. If it's greater, then we're told to give 7% on the sales that was made. Okay, don't forget, we need to log down the commission rate. Then comma, moving on to the third condition. If our sales is greater than 350, then our commission rate, which is 5%, F4 to log that down, multiply by the sales amount, then our last. So we have our sales when it is less than 350. Then we give the sales rep just 2% of the sales made. Shift 8 of the series being made. And close that, enter. So this is how to go about conditional function in Excel. So we can copy down our formula and we are good to go. Moving on to the second one, which is our if or and if and. For if or, we have two or more conditions, but in this case, we have just two conditions. So we always meant to do whenever we have if or function is at least one of the condition must be met, one of the criteria must be met. Giving a typical example, so we have list of students and two tests that they did test 1 and test 2. So if or function is basically giving the scenario saying that at least a student should score at least 60% for the student to move on to the next class. At least 60% in either one of test 1 or test 2. So how do we go about this? So start your function with equals to, then if, then we have or basically. So this is called the nested function, having a function inside another function. So for our or, which is the first one we're going to be dealing with, it says what's the logical, what was the first argument? The logical one. So that is our test 1 should be greater than the criteria set. That's 60%. At least 60%, comma, our test 2 should be at least 60%. Then we can close this. Closing this means that the or function is basically represented by the logical test argument, basically. So moving on to the second argument, which is the value if true. We do that by using our comma sign. So if we move on to the value if true, what's the value if true? So our value if true is if the student meets this criteria, if the criteria are being met, so you pass. That's so we'll quote our test string pass. Then comma to move to the last argument, which is the value if false. So we quote our test string also, which is fail. Close this, then enter. Then we'll copy down our formula. That's good. Moving on to the last one, which is our and if function, if and. So for if and, both conditions must be met. Both conditions must be met. Giving a typical example, so we have practical and exam for the student. So our practical, the score must be greater than 20, and while the score for exam must be greater than 40. Both condition must be met if you're using if and. So these two are using nested function, a function inside a another function. So we have if and. So and is basically logical. So you're saying practical should be greater than 20. Then our exam also should be greater than the benchmark of 40. We close this. The AND function is basically represented by the logical test argument. So to move on to the value if true argument, we insert a comma there. What's the value if true? The value if true there should be the student is being promoted to the next class. Then to move on to the last argument, which is value if true, a value if false rather. So we have the students to repeat the class if both criteria is not met. So we have this, then copy down the formula. So even at the end of the day, his exam score is greater than the benchmark set, which is 40, but the student fails to meet the required target of 20% of 20 for his practical. That is why he's meant to repeat the class. So that's that for conditional functions. Thumbs up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.